Behind Stallone's iconic helmet lay a production so chaotic that the director swore off A-list actors forever, while Burger King sued the studio when toys had to be canceled. From a missing rock star's final song to a council member's visible booger in close-ups. This sci-fi blockbuster harbored secrets stranger than Mega City 1 itself. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Judge Dredd. Stallone had no clue what Judge Dredd was. When Sylvester Stallone was offered the lead role in Judge Dredd, he walked into the project completely blind. The action star had absolutely no knowledge of the character, the comic book series, or anything about the dystopian world of Mega City 1 that had captivated British readers for nearly 2 decades. This wasn't a case of an actor doing limited research or having a passing familiarity with the source material. Stallone genuinely had never heard of Judge Dredd before the script landed on his desk. Judge Dredd had been a cornerstone of British comic culture since 1977, appearing in the weekly anthology comic 2000 A.D. Created by writer John Wagner and artist Carlos Ezquerra, the character had built a massive following in the United Kingdom and had become one of the most recognizable figures in British science fiction. The comic had explored complex themes about fascism, justice, and authoritarianism through its satirical lens, making Dredd both a hero and a critique of extreme law enforcement. For Stallone, however, this rich history and cultural significance meant nothing because he simply wasn't aware it existed. The Hollywood machine had identified Judge Dredd as potential blockbuster material and packaged it as just another action vehicle for one of the biggest stars of the 1990s. Stallone approached the role the same way he might approach any other action script, without understanding the deeper satirical elements or the specific tone that made the character work in the comics. This disconnect between star and source material would prove to be one of the fundamental problems plaguing the production from the very beginning. When an actor doesn't understand the essence of a character that fans have loved for decades, it creates an immediate barrier to authenticity that no amount of special effects or production value can overcome. The director banned himself from A-list actors. Director Danny Cannon made a career-defining decision after working with Sylvester Stallone on Judge Dredd. He would never again put himself through the ordeal of directing another major Hollywood star. The experience was so emotionally draining and professionally frustrating that Cannon publicly declared he was done with what he called self-absorbed actors, effectively banning himself from the A-list celebrity machine that drives most big-budget filmmaking. The creative disputes between Cannon and Stallone were constant and bitter throughout the production. Cannon had a specific vision for Judge Dredd that was much darker and more satirical, staying closer to the tone of the original British comics. He wanted to create a film that would capture the dystopian atmosphere and social commentary that made the character work on the page. Stallone, however, had completely different ideas about what the movie should be and wasn't shy about demanding changes to make it fit his vision of an action comedy vehicle. These weren't minor disagreements about individual scenes or dialogue choices. According to Cannon, the final version of Judge Dredd was completely different from his original script because of the extensive rewrites that Stallone demanded. The director watched his carefully crafted story get transformed into something he barely recognized, and the process left him feeling powerless and defeated by the Hollywood star system. Cannon later revealed that the experience taught him that working with major stars often meant sacrificing creative control and artistic integrity. The constant battles over every aspect of the production, from tone to specific scenes, created an environment where the director felt more like an employee carrying out orders rather than the creative leader of the project. This disillusionment with the realities of big-budget filmmaking led to his unusual self-imposed restriction on working with A-list talent in future projects. A visible booger made it into the final cut. In one of the most embarrassing continuity mistakes ever captured in a major Hollywood production, Judge Dredd features a close-up shot where a dry booger is clearly visible hanging from the nostril of one of the council judges during the crucial tribunal scene. This awkward moment occurs when the camera focuses on the highest-ranking council member's face as he's speaking from behind his desk or podium, delivering what should be a serious and dramatic moment in the film. The tribunal scene is one of the most important sequences in Judge Dredd, where the protagonist faces judgment from his peers after being framed for murder. It's supposed to be a tense, courtroom-style drama where Dredd's fate hangs in the balance, with the council judges delivering weighty dialogue about justice and the law. Instead, viewers found themselves distracted by the unmistakable presence of dried nasal matter clearly visible in the actor's nostril during what should have been a pivotal dramatic moment. What makes this mistake even more bizarre is that the booger performs a disappearing act worthy of a magic show. When the camera cuts away from the council judge and then returns to show his face again in another close-up shot, the offensive nasal obstruction has completely vanished without any explanation. This means that either the booger fell out between takes, someone noticed it and cleaned it up, or different takes from the same scene were edited together without anyone catching the inconsistency. The fact that this made it through multiple layers of production, oversight, including the director, editor, and post-production team, suggests just how chaotic the filmmaking process had become. In an $85 to $90 million production, having such an obvious and distracting mistake survive to the final cut demonstrates the kind of rushed or careless attention to detail that plagued the entire project. Burger King sued over canceled toy promotions. Burger King found themselves in the middle of a legal battle with Hollywood Pictures when Judge Dredd's rating problems destroyed their planned promotional campaign. The fast food giant had already committed to a major tie-in deal that would have featured Judge Dredd toys in their kids' meals, expecting to capitalize on what they thought would be a family-friendly blockbuster suitable for their young customers. The trouble began when the Motion Picture Association of America kept rejecting the film for being too violent and graphic. Judge Dredd had to be resubmitted to the ratings board 5 separate times as the studio desperately tried to cut enough content to bring it down from an NC-17 rating, which would have been commercial suicide for a big-budget action movie. The NC-17 rating essentially means no one under 17 can see the film, which would have eliminated most of the target audience that Hollywood Pictures was counting on. Even after all those cuts and resubmissions, the best rating the studio could achieve was an R, meaning no one under 17 could see it without a parent or guardian. This created an immediate problem for Burger King, since fast food chains simply cannot promote R-rated movies to children through their kids' meal toys. The company had already invested time, money, and resources into developing the promotional materials and toy designs based on their agreement with the studio. When Burger King was forced to cancel their entire promotional campaign, they decided to take legal action against Hollywood Pictures to recover their losses. The lawsuit represented a complete breakdown of what should have been a mutually beneficial marketing partnership, where both companies expected to profit from cross-promotion between the movie and the restaurant chain. Instead of toys and Happy Meals, Burger King ended up with legal bills and a damaged business relationship, while the movie lost a valuable promotional partner that could have helped drive ticket sales. A missing rock star's final song almost made the soundtrack. The Judge Dredd soundtrack almost featured a song that carried an incredibly tragic backstory, written by a musician who would vanish without a trace just months before the film's release. The Manic Street Preachers, a popular Welsh rock band, had written a song called Judge Yourself specifically for the movie, but the track never made it onto the final soundtrack listing due to circumstances that no one could have predicted. The song held special significance because it was the last piece of music, written by Richie Edwards, the band's guitarist and lyricist, before he disappeared on February 1, 1995. Edwards had been struggling with depression, self-harm, and other personal issues, and his disappearance remains one of the most mysterious cases in British music history. He was officially declared presumed dead in 2008, but his body was never found, and the circumstances of his disappearance have never been explained. Because Judge Self was the final creative work from Edwards before he vanished, the remaining members of Manic Street Preachers were understandably reluctant to release it as part of a Hollywood movie soundtrack. The song represented the last connection they had to their missing bandmate, and using it for commercial purposes in a film tie-in probably felt inappropriate given the tragic circumstances surrounding its creation. The track remained unreleased for 8 years until the band finally included it on their 2003 compilation album called Lipstick Traces: A Secret History of Manic Street Preachers. By that time, Judge Dredd had long been forgotten by most moviegoers, but the song served as a haunting reminder of what might have been both for the film's soundtrack and for a talented musician whose story ended far too soon and under mysterious circumstances that continue to puzzle fans and investigators alike. James Earl Jones secretly narrated the opening. James Earl Jones lent his legendary voice to Judge Dredd in a way that most audiences never realized, providing the opening narration that sets up the film's dystopian future without receiving any prominent credit or publicity for his contribution. The man whose deep, commanding voice had made Darth Vader one of cinema's most memorable villains was brought in to deliver the exposition that explains how the world became the wasteland known as the Cursed Earth. Jones's narration opens the film with text that scrolls across the screen, explaining how climate change and nations in upheaval transformed the Earth into a poisonous, scorched desert in the 3rd millennium. His distinctive voice guides viewers through the backstory of how millions of people crowded into megacities while roving bands of street savages created violence that the traditional justice system could not control, leading to the rise of the judges who serve as police, jury, and executioner all in one. The decision to use Jones for this role made perfect sense from a storytelling perspective, since his voice carries an automatic sense of authority and gravitas that helps sell the serious, apocalyptic tone the filmmakers were trying to establish. Having the voice of Darth Vader explain the collapse of civilization and the rise of a fascist law enforcement system adds an extra layer of ominous weight to the opening moments of the film. However, unlike his famous role as the voice of Darth Vader, Jones's work on Judge Dredd wasn't heavily promoted or used as a selling point for the movie. Most viewers probably didn't even realize they were hearing one of the most recognizable voices in film history during those opening moments, since his contribution was treated more like standard voiceover work rather than a celebrity cameo that would be highlighted in the marketing materials or end credits. The original villain was Judge Death. The original concept for Judge Dredd featured a completely different and far more terrifying villain than the Rico character who ended up in the final film. Early in development, the filmmakers planned to use Judge Death as the main antagonist, a supernatural entity from the comics who represents the complete opposite of everything the Justice Department stands for. Judge Death is one of the most popular and frightening villains in the Judge Dredd universe, a skeletal figure who believes that since crime is committed by the living, life itself should be illegal. Judge Death comes from a parallel dimension where he and 3 other dark judges have already succeeded in killing every living person on their version of Earth, declaring the crime of living to be punishable by death. In the comics, Judge Death is portrayed as an unstoppable force of pure evil who can possess human bodies and cannot be permanently destroyed, making him a recurring nightmare for both Judge Dredd and the citizens of Mega City 1. His famous catchphrase, "The crime is life, the sentence is death," perfectly captures his twisted logic and murderous philosophy. Using Judge Death as the villain would have created a much darker, horror-oriented film that focused on supernatural terror, rather than the political intrigue and family drama that dominated the Rico storyline. The movie would have featured elements of body horror, possession, and apocalyptic themes as Judge Death attempted to bring his campaign of total extermination to Dredd's dimension. This approach would have been much closer to the tone of the original comics, which often blend science fiction with horror elements. The decision to abandon Judge Death in favor of Rico represented a significant shift toward a more conventional action movie format, trading the unique supernatural horror elements for a more familiar story about corruption, cloning, and family betrayal that studio executives probably felt would be easier for mainstream audiences to understand. Arnold Schwarzenegger was originally considered for Dredd. Before Sylvester Stallone stepped into the iconic helmet and body armor of Judge Dredd, Hollywood was considering a very different action star for the role. Arnold Schwarzenegger was reportedly among the actors being discussed for the title character during the early stages of development, which would have created a completely different version of the film given Schwarzenegger's unique screen presence and distinctive delivery style. The idea of Schwarzenegger as Judge Dredd is fascinating to consider, especially since the Austrian actor was at the height of his popularity in the early 1990s, following successful films like Terminator 2 and Total Recall. His robotic delivery and imposing physical presence might have actually been better suited to the character of Judge Dredd, who is supposed to be emotionless, single-minded, and completely devoted to enforcing the law without any human warmth or compassion. While Schwarzenegger was being considered for the lead role, the casting directors were also pursuing other big names for supporting characters. Joe Pesci, the Academy Award-winning actor known for his roles in Goodfellas and Home Alone, was actually offered the part of Herman Ferguson, the hacker character who becomes Dredd's unlikely sidekick throughout most of the film. Pesci ultimately turned down the opportunity, leaving the door open for Rob Schneider to take on the role that would become one of the most criticized aspects of the entire production. The casting of Pesci would have brought a completely different energy to the Ferguson character, since Pesci is known for his intense, sometimes violent screen persona rather than the comedic approach that Schneider brought to the role. Having both Schwarzenegger and Pesci in the film would have created a much more serious, action-oriented tone that might have been closer to the gritty atmosphere of the original comics. Ian Dury played the pawn shop owner. Hidden in plain sight during one of Judge Dredd's most memorable scenes is a famous British musician who most viewers never recognized. When Rico visits Geiger's gun shop to retrieve his old Judge equipment and reactivate the ABC Warrior robot, the gruff shop owner behind the counter is actually Ian Dury, the legendary singer and songwriter from the band Ian Dury and the Blockheads, appearing in what would be one of his rare acting roles. Ian Dury was a major figure in British music during the late 1970s and early 1980s, known for hits like Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick and Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll. He was part of the punk and new wave movement that emerged from London, and his distinctive voice and witty lyrics made him a beloved figure in British popular culture. Dury had a physical disability from childhood polio, which gave him a unique perspective that often came through in his music and public persona. Many viewers who spotted the shop owner's distinctive appearance mistakenly believed they were seeing the actor who played Minty in the British soap opera EastEnders, showing how easy it was to confuse one recognizable British face for another. This case of mistaken identity became common enough that it needed to be officially corrected, with fans having to clarify that it was indeed the famous musician rather than the soap opera actor. Dury's appearance in Judge Dredd represented an interesting piece of casting that connected the film to British cultural figures, which was appropriate given that Judge Dredd originated as a British comic character. The scene where Rico intimidates Geiger and takes control of the massive robot becomes even more interesting when you realize that one of Britain's most beloved musicians is playing the unfortunate shop owner who gets caught up in the villain's plans. The ABC Warrior robot says only one word. The massive ABC Warrior robot that serves as Rico's primary weapon and enforcer throughout Judge Dredd has an extremely limited vocabulary, speaking only one word during the entire film. When Rico activates the decommissioned combat robot and tells it, "We're going to war," the mechanical giant responds with an enthusiastic and drawn-out "War" that perfectly captures its single-minded purpose as a weapon of destruction. The ABC Warrior is supposed to be a leftover from previous conflicts, designed to be resistant to atomic, bacteriological, and chemical warfare, which is what the letters ABC represent in its name. These robots were created as the ultimate soldiers, built to survive and fight in the most extreme combat conditions imaginable. The fact that this particular unit can only say one word suggests that its programming has been stripped down to the absolute essentials, focused entirely on combat and warfare with no need for complex communication. The robot's enthusiastic delivery of "war" shows that it's not just programmed for violence, but actually seems eager and excited about the prospect of battle. The way the word is stretched out and shouted with obvious relish gives the machine an almost childlike enthusiasm for destruction, which creates an unsettling contrast between its innocent excitement and its deadly capabilities. This single-word vocabulary also serves a practical filmmaking purpose, since it eliminates the need for complex dialogue or character development for what is essentially a walking weapon. The ABC Warrior doesn't need to express complex thoughts or emotions because its entire existence revolves around one simple concept: war. The robot's limited speech reinforces the idea that it's been designed as a tool rather than a thinking being, programmed with just enough intelligence to follow orders and destroy targets without any unnecessary complications. Stallone's Justice tattoo was fake and visible. During the climactic battle scenes at the Statue of Liberty, sharp-eyed viewers can spot one of the most embarrassing makeup failures in Judge Dredd when Sylvester Stallone's fake Justice tattoo becomes clearly visible as a poorly applied prop. The artificial tattoo, which is supposed to represent Judge Dredd's dedication to the law, can be seen peeling away from Stallone's upper arm, with the edges of the fake skin clearly lifting and separating from his actual flesh. The tattoo was meant to be an important character detail that showed Dredd's complete commitment to his role as a judge, literally marking his body with the word that defines his entire existence. In a movie where the main character's identity revolves around being the ultimate enforcer of justice, having justice permanently inked on his arm was supposed to be a powerful visual symbol of his unwavering dedication to the law above all else. However, the practical reality of creating this effect for filming proved to be much more challenging than the filmmakers anticipated. Instead of using a real tattoo or high-quality special effects makeup, the production team apparently relied on a temporary tattoo or adhesive applique that wasn't properly secured to Stallone's skin. The physical demands of the action sequences, combined with sweat, movement, and the general wear and tear of filming fight scenes, caused the fake tattoo to lose its adhesion. What makes this mistake particularly noticeable is that it occurs during some of the most important and dramatic moments of the entire film, when audiences should be focused on the final confrontation between Dredd and Rico. Instead, viewers found themselves distracted by the obvious artificiality of a key character detail, which undermined the serious tone the filmmakers were trying to maintain during the movie's climactic scenes. Street names referenced classic comedy themes. Hidden within the serious, dystopian world of Judge Dredd are several playful references to classic American comedy that most viewers probably missed during the film's intense action sequences. When Judge Hershey radios in crime scene locations, she provides street addresses that pay tribute to some of the most beloved comedy duos in entertainment history, creating an unexpected connection between the dark future of Mega City 1 and the golden age of American humor. During one scene, Hershey calls in a location as "at the corner of Burns and Allen," which is a direct reference to George Burns and Gracie Allen, the husband and wife comedy team who dominated radio, television, and vaudeville for decades. George Burns was known for his deadpan delivery and cigar smoking, while Gracie Allen played the lovably confused wife whose illogical statements and misunderstandings created endless comedic situations. Their partnership lasted from the 1920s until Allen's retirement in the 1950s. In another scene, Hershey reports a crime scene location as at the corner of Abbott and Costello, honoring the famous comedy duo of Bud Abbott and Lou Costello. These two performers were best known for their "Who's on First" routine, which became one of the most famous comedy sketches in American entertainment history. Abbott played the straight man, while Costello was the confused, bumbling character who would get increasingly frustrated as their conversations descended into verbal chaos. These street name references represent a clever way for the filmmakers to inject some levity and cultural nostalgia into an otherwise grim and violent story. The decision to name streets after comedy legends creates an interesting contrast with the serious tone of the film, suggesting that even in the darkest possible future, people might still remember and honor the entertainers who brought laughter to previous generations. A director had bizarre on-set behavior. The production of Judge Dredd was plagued by unusual behavior from director Danny Cannon that made it clear the film was heading for trouble almost from the very beginning. According to Sylvester Stallone, Cannon would engage in bizarre displays of authority that left the entire cast and crew wondering what kind of movie they had signed up for, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and confusion on set. Stallone later described how Cannon, who was described as rather diminutive in stature, would suddenly jump down from his director's chair without warning and begin shouting at everyone within earshot. The director would yell, "Fear me! Everyone should fear me!" to the assembled crew members, demanding respect and intimidation through his outbursts rather than earning it through professional competence and leadership skills. What made these incidents even more strange was how quickly they would end. After delivering his dramatic proclamation about being feared, Cannon would immediately jump back up into his director's chair and continue working as if nothing unusual had happened. This pattern of erratic behavior suggested that the director was either struggling with insecurity about his authority on a big-budget production or was dealing with stress in ways that were completely inappropriate for a professional film set. Stallone recognized these outbursts as warning signs that the production was going to be problematic, later saying that he knew they were in for a long and difficult shoot when these incidents began occurring. The actor's willingness to share this story publicly reveals just how dysfunctional the working relationship between star and director had become, and helps explain why the creative disputes between them became so intense and bitter throughout the filming process. Diane Lane refused nudity due to Stallone's physique. Diane Lane found herself in an awkward position when the producers of Judge Dredd requested that she appear nude in the film, but she had a very specific and humorous reason for refusing their request. Lane, who played Judge Hershey in the movie, was concerned about how her body would look compared to Sylvester Stallone's incredibly muscular physique, leading to one of the most entertaining behind-the-scenes quotes from the entire production. Lane later explained her reluctance by saying she had this phobia that they were going to get my butt on screen at the same time as Sylvester Stallone's during any potential nude scenes. Her concern wasn't about nudity itself, but rather about the unflattering comparison that would inevitably be made between her normal human body and Stallone's intensely sculpted form that he had developed through years of bodybuilding and fitness training. The actress went even further in describing her intimidation, referring to Stallone's extremely well-developed gluteal muscles as cinder blocks for glutes. This colorful description perfectly captured just how impossibly firm and muscular Stallone's posterior had become through his dedicated workout routines, making it clear that Lane felt like she would look inadequate by comparison if they were both shown without clothing in the same scene. Lane's frank admission reveals the kind of body image pressures that actresses face when working alongside action stars who have spent considerable time and effort developing their physical appearance for roles. Her decision to refuse the nudity request shows that she was confident enough to stand up for herself and avoid a situation that would have made her uncomfortable, even when dealing with pressure from producers who wanted to add more adult content to the film. The film completely changed from the original script. The final version of Judge Dredd that audiences saw in theaters was completely different from director Danny Cannon's original screenplay, representing one of the most dramatic script transformations in Hollywood history. Cannon had written a much darker and more satirical film that would have stayed closer to the tone and themes of the original British comic books, but Stallone's interference fundamentally changed the entire project into something the director barely recognized. Stallone approached the material with a completely different understanding of what kind of movie Judge Dredd was supposed to be, believing that it should function as an action comedy rather than the serious dystopian satire that Cannon had envisioned. This fundamental disagreement about the film's tone created an irreconcilable conflict between star and director that would define the entire troubled production process from beginning to end. The actor demanded extensive rewrites to make the script much more comedic and lighthearted, pushing for changes that would transform Judge Dredd into a typical Stallone action vehicle, with humor and one-liners rather than the dark social commentary that the source material was known for. Cannon watched helplessly as his carefully crafted screenplay was systematically dismantled and rebuilt to accommodate Stallone's vision of what the movie should become. Cannon later stated that the final version was so different from his original script that it felt like watching someone else's movie entirely. The director had intended to create a film that would explore themes about fascism, authoritarianism, and the dangers of unchecked law enforcement power, using the futuristic setting to comment on real-world political issues. Instead, the finished product became a standard action movie that focused more on explosions, one-liners, and comedic moments than on the deeper satirical elements that made the Judge Dredd character compelling in the first place.